Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, a candidate for the 2020 Libertarian Party presidential nomination. It's great to be here with y'all in this session of Ask Me Anything. Appreciate you tuning in and sending me questions. I thought I'd start out with just a little synopsis of my background and why I'm seeking this position of the Libertarian Party presidential nominee. I grew up on a farm on the Rio Grande in South Texas in a city called Laredo, Texas, which is located right on the US-Mexico border. And I graduated from high school there, went to college at Virginia Military Institute, where I got a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics. I also got commissioned as an infantry officer in the US Army Reserves. Then I went to law school at the University of Texas. I had to drop out for a semester to go to infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia, which was 3 months. And then I had 2 months left before I resumed my law studies. And so I went to Dallas, Texas, and waited tables in a restaurant there for a couple of months, returned to law school and got a law degree and returned to Laredo to practice law with my dad. And so we practiced law for some 8 years together. We were civil and criminal trial attorneys. And then at that time, I was an ardent Democrat. I mean, I grew up as a Democrat. And so I was on the Legal Aid Board of Trustees, which was a government agency that provided free legal care, free legal assistance to poor people. I was also the ACLU representative in Laredo. And I believed that government had a legitimate role in taking care of poor people, the disadvantaged, and so forth. And then from there, my dad passed away in '82, and I decided that I would move to Dallas and start my own law practice there. And I did that for 4 years. I also was part of that time serving as an adjunct professor of law and economics at the University of Dallas. But back in Laredo, I had discovered the Libertarian Philosophy, and it changed the course of my life. I was about 29 years old, and it was just a road to Damascus experience. I just realized the minute I started reading about libertarianism that all the lies that I had been taught and the government schools I had attended, the indoctrination I had received, and it was like I say, a road to Damascus experience. So by the time I moved to Dallas, this was my passion. I mean, I was still practicing law and I loved practicing law, but I mean, there was nothing like libertarianism. I was studying and reading and organizing speaker things and programs in Dallas and in Houston. And then suddenly I got invited to be the program director at the Foundation for Economic Education in New York, which of course would have meant giving up the law practice. And that's what I decided to do. I decided to go where my heart was. I went to what is called FEE, F-E-E, and they were located in right north of New York City. I stayed there for 2 years, and then, which was a fantastic experience. And then I left to start my own foundation, which is called the Future of Freedom Foundation. And I was working closely with a good friend of mine that I had known in Dallas at the University of Dallas named Richard Ebeling, who later went on to become the Ludwig von Mises Professor of Economics at Hillsdale, and then later became president of FEE, and now is the academician and professor at the Citadel. So Richard was the vice president of academic affairs for FFF, and we started from scratch, and our mission was to present the principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy. And that's what I've been doing for 30 years. I've been advancing liberty, trying to achieve a free society in the educational arena. Well, last November, I decided to go from the educational arena into the political arena. I decided I wanted to take on the people who have really destroyed our liberty in this country, our well-being. And that, of course, is both Democrats and Republicans. So I decided to seek the Libertarian Party presidential nomination with a unique approach, is to wage a campaign that is based purely on libertarian principles against these Democrats and Republicans. I call it a campaign of principle for the party of principle, because the motto of the Libertarian Party is the party of principle. So I said, okay, what I want to run is a campaign of principle for the party of principle. And so, and I knew I had an uphill battle because there's a lot of people in the party that favor reform, maintaining the welfare, warfare state way of life and just reforming it, and improving it, and trying to fix it, make it work better. That holds no interest for me, because I don't believe that's, well, it's not really liberty. Liberty is the dismantling of infringements on freedom, not their reform. It's sort of like slavery, that if we had just reformed slavery, it wouldn't have been freedom. It might have been a better life for the slaves, but it wouldn't have been freedom. To achieve freedom, you got to dismantle the structure of slavery, and you got to do the same with respect to what we call the welfare warfare state. Now, I'm what's called in libertarian circles a minarchist. I believe in limited government, a limited government republic. And so I oppose the whole national security state government apparatus we have. I favor a limited government republic with a basic military force. Get rid of the CIA, the NSA, the massive military industrial complex, bring all the troops home from everywhere, stop foreign interventionism entirely. But at the same time, open the borders to the private sector, liberate the American people to travel and trade freely without government restriction anywhere in the world. Legalize all drugs, not just marijuana. Government plays no legitimate role in what people ingest. A free society is necessarily one where you can put anything you want into your mouth, because that's what freedom is partly all about. And so I would put drug addiction and drug use only in the private sector, not in the criminal justice sector. And then with respect to these coercive mandatory welfare programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education grants, farm subsidies, corporate bailouts, end them all. I favor our heritage of a system where everybody keeps everything they earn and they decide what to do with it. 100% voluntary charity system, which was our system for more than 100 years. Healthcare, I would separate healthcare in the state entirely. Get government entirely out of the healthcare business. Same with money. Separate money in the state. Get rid of the Federal Reserve and have a total free market monetary system. So those are my basic principles. The two most important that I'm running in this campaign are foreign policy, because it involves so much death and destruction that the U.S. national security state has wreaked on people all over the world, and especially in the Middle East and Afghanistan. Bring all the troops home and discharge them immediately. They're not necessary, because we don't need a system of foreign intervention. And then healthcare is the second one, because there's a lot of unnecessary death and suffering going on now with this coronavirus crisis. The only solution to this, and I've been saying this for 30 years, even before the coronavirus crisis, the only solution to America's healthcare crisis is a genuine free market system, a total separation of healthcare in the state. So that should give you a pretty good idea of my background, my philosophy, and my platform in this campaign. And I'm now ready to take y'all's questions. So we'll start with one. Do you listen to the Tom Woods Show? Well, I confess I don't, but because I don't generally listen to podcasts, but I will say this: Tom Woods is a great friend of mine and one of my heroes. And I've been on his show twice now. And in fact, he told me that one of his most popular podcasts ever is the one I did called Abolish the CIA. While I don't listen to Tom Woods, I would highly recommend that everybody listen to Tom Woods, because he's one of the most brilliant libertarians I've ever encountered, and his stuff is just first class. All right, next question. Can you give a detailed, I guess I'll do the names on this from Paul. Can you give a detailed description of how you plan to dismantle the Federal Reserve? Well, keep in mind that a president doesn't have the power to dismantle very much. He can lift or cancel executive orders, and I would do that immediately. All the bad things that they've done with executive orders, like sanctions against the people of Iran, just cancel those executive orders immediately. But I don't like executive orders. I think they're very dictatorial in nature. I think you should be required to go to Congress and seek permission for things. So to abolish or dismantle the Federal Reserve obviously means going to Congress and asking them to enact a law that dismantles the Federal Reserve. What are the chances of that with a Democratic, Republican controlled Congress? Well, slim. But what you do on trying to achieve these aspects of a free society is that you make the case for liberty. You get out there and you say, this is why, to the American people. You make your case to the American people, then you get them to put the pressure on the members of Congress. And you go out and you make that case that, hey, look, the Federal Reserve has done irreparable damage. From the very beginning, when they were established in 1913, they destroyed the finest monetary system in history. the gold coin, silver coin standard that had been established in the Constitution. I mean, this provided sound money for more than 100 years. It's one of the biggest contributors to the highest standard of living in history. And the Federal Reserve destroyed that through just the printing of irredeemable paper currency notes. And then decade after decade, they've just plundered and looted people through monetary debasement, devaluation. I mean, notice how Franklin Roosevelt had come into office and nationalized gold coins. Imagine this had been the official money. And he did what the communists were doing in the Soviet Union, just nationalized it. But they left silver in circulation, silver dollars and silver quarters, silver dimes. But with the massive inflation that the Federal Reserve did in the 60s and 70s and 80s, all those silver coins were driven out of circulation. I mean, that's Gresham's law, bad money drives out good money. And so you make that case to the American people of why we should have a free market monetary system, which would be even better than the gold coin, silver coin standard. The free market produces the best of everything. And then once people grasp that, the benefits of a free market, they put the pressure on the members of Congress to get that thing dismantled because it's in their interest to do it. Not only do they have liberty as a result of sound money and their private property is in better shape, but it provides one of the keys to higher standards of living. All right, this one was Victor. Is it 100% impossible to imagine a unity ticket despite your differences between you and Justin Amash? Well, I think so. I mean, it would be impossible for me to serve as Amash's vice president. That would never work because if Amash is made the nominee, he needs somebody that matches up with him. And that means a reformer, somebody that from the reform wing of the movement or the party that accepts this notion that the welfare warfare state should stay in existence, but that we should just simply reform it. And this is one of the great battles that has taken place in the last 30 years in this movement and in the party as well. You've got the reform wing that takes the position that they're not going to call for dismantling these infringements on liberty because they say people don't listen, they won't be taken seriously, they won't be taken credibly. So a long time ago, they just threw in the towel and said, we accept that the welfare warfare state is here, it's permanent, we're not going to do anything radical, we're just going to try to reform it with public policy prescriptions, choice proposals, or proposals based on what they call choice, and then also trying to get better people like libertarian-leaning conservatives into heads of regulatory agencies to bring free enterprise approaches to the regulatory process. I say the only way you can have a free society is not by reforming infringements on freedom. You've got to dismantle them. I mean, it's just logical. And it doesn't matter to me whether people are ready for freedom or not. You got to get out there and make the case for freedom if you're going to get the free society. It's like slavery. If all somebody did was reform slavery, better work conditions, fewer work hours, better food, fewer lashings, that would have been better. I mean, obviously for the slaves, but it wouldn't have been freedom. And so I want a free society for myself and for everyone else. So you couldn't have a person running as your presidential candidate that's calling for reform of the welfare warfare state, and then a presidential candidate that's saying, no, he's wrong. You need to abolish these programs. There just would be constant conflict. And so if Amash is made the nominee, he has to have somebody that matches up with him, one of the reform elements in the party or the movement. Now, the reverse, I think, holds true itself. I mean, you've got to have two people that are basically on the same page to run a campaign that coalesces, that brings a consistent vision of liberty and libertarianism to the American people. And I just think that if you have one candidate that's over there making the case for liberty and another candidate over here that's making the case for reform, it's not going to mesh well. And the media is going to just seize on it. They're going to sense what's happening. And there's going to be this tension and conflict between the two candidates. So I think it'd be best to just go ahead and match up one way or the other. That if I were to get this nominee, I would love to have a vice presidential candidate that feels the same way I do, that's going out there and battling with Mike Pence and saying, we need liberty in this land. And I would be battling with Trump and Biden saying, look, we need liberty in this land, not this warmed over conservatism and progressivism. Okay, this is Toby Clayton. I don't know if I should be disclosing the names or not. Maybe I should protect names here. I'll just use first names. If you win the nomination, strike that Toby Clayton name from your memory. If you win the nomination, who would be your running mate? Well, it's just sort of presumptuous for me to go down that direction. I got myself one heck of a battle here. You know, we were doing really well, you know, in this campaign. And it was fun. It was exciting, especially before the coronavirus crisis hit. Man, I've never had so much fun attending these state conventions. I've been to 18 state conventions, 12 presidential debates, and it's been a transformative event in my life. I mean, regardless of what happens, it's just been the most positive experience interacting with libertarians and getting my batteries charged up and stuff. But now I'm in a real battle here. I mean, I'm like starting all over again with Amash in the race, but it's good. It's exciting. It's exciting for the party. It's exciting for the movement. Look at the national media attention that his entry into the race is focusing on our little Libertarian Party presidential race. And there's no doubt that whoever wins this race, whether it's Amash or me or Kokesh or Joe Jorgensen or anybody else, there's going to be national media attention, because whoever knocks off the giant that's producing all the publicity is necessarily going to be the one getting the publicity. So it's just too presumptuous of me to say, well, this is who I'm thinking about my VP candidate, because I got to stay focused on winning this nomination. All right, so this is Jolly Roger. I guess I can say that name. Would you move to return all of the Social Security we've already paid in, assuming you intend to follow through with ending it? Well, there's actually no money that anybody's paid in. So there's nothing to return because nothing's been paid in. See, that's the myth that we've all convinced ourselves. Let me give you an analogy of this. I've paid sales taxes all my life. Now, I don't know how much in sales taxes, but let's say an estimate would be $100,000 over my entire lifetime. I paid $100,000 in sales taxes. Do I have a right to get it back? Okay, well, if I do have a right to get it back, who is the government going to take it from? You? Are you going to be willing to fork over your share of my $100,000? If the government comes and taxes you and says, well, we got to give Jacob a refund for all those sales taxes, my hunch is that you might say, well, that sounds like a pretty good deal. I want a refund of my sales taxes too. So the point is that everybody pays taxes. Nobody pays into something. The government collects taxes. They have throughout, civilization. So there's no like tax fund. You don't pay your taxes and then they go into a fund. The government collects the taxes. And the moment the government collects the taxes, that's no longer your money. It's gone. And the government spends it because it belongs to the government. They don't owe you anything. And so Social Security is no different from any other welfare state program. It's not a retirement fund. You don't donate into the retirement fund. It's not like an IRA. It's not like a 401k. It's just a welfare program like food stamps or corporate bailouts or education grants. It's no different. Now, they disguise it by saying, oh, you're going to pay a FICA tax or a payroll tax, for Medicare or whatever. But all they're doing is just adding to the taxes that they collect. They could have easily just said, well, we're going to increase income taxes by 10% to cover the Social Security payments. Now, how do they fund Social Security? Well, they fund it through taxes. They tax younger people. They get that money and they transfer it to older people. So what about the older people? Well, they pay taxes too. And that money was used to fund their parents and grandparents and their generation who are all dead. So the money that they collect in Social Security taxes, like the money they collect in income taxes or excise taxes or tariffs, it's spent immediately. So when somebody says, I want my money that I've paid in, what they're really saying is, I want you to tax younger people and give me their money. Because you took money from me in sales taxes or income taxes or tariffs, and I want money back. So take it from them. And that's what we often forget, that it's Frederick Bastiat saying that government is the great fiction by which everyone seeks to live at the expense of everyone else. So in other words, everybody's trying to, not everybody, but just euphemistically, everybody is trying to get into other people's pocketbooks, into their income, and seize it. While at the same time, everybody's trying to protect their own pocketbook, their own income, their assets with tax deductions and tax credits and all kinds of tax loopholes. Because what you're trying to do is protect yourself from other people plundering and looting you through the government. And everybody else is doing the same thing. So everybody's trying to get into everybody else's pocketbook while at the same time, everybody's trying to protect himself. Now, why do you need Social Security? I mean, how many people ask that? Why do you need it? Why do you need to be stealing money through the political process from young people? We're talking about, like, if you add Social Security and Medicare, I think it adds up to about $2 trillion. And this isn't even part of the national debt. This is unfunded liabilities that taxpayers are responsible for. Well, so those $2 trillion are taken out of younger people's pockets every year on a monthly basis. That's what withholding is, and the Fica tax and all that. That $2 trillion is not just because Uncle Sam's a rich uncle. It's taking it from the younger people. Now, why not just leave that $2 trillion in the pockets of younger people? See, nobody ever asked that question. Why not eliminate the middleman? Because the middleman is the IRS and the Social Security Administration. And why not eliminate them, fire them, send them home, and just leave the $2 trillion in the hands of young people? Well, the attitude is because younger people won't help out elderly people. They won't help out their parents. They need to be forced to do so. Well, that's highly insulting. And it shows a lack of faith in freedom and a lack of faith in younger people and a lack of faith in people in general. I have no doubts that if you left that $2 trillion in the hands of younger people, it'd be fine. It'd be fine. And that's what freedom's really all about. And that was one of the good founding principles of our country. People keep everything they earn, no mandatory charity. You do what you want with your own money. And that system was there for 100 years. No Social Security, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no income taxation, no IRS, no Federal Reserve. And it was not only the most prosperous nation in history, it was the most charitable nation in history, all on a voluntary basis. People helped out seniors, people helped out the poor, including doctors, on a free basis. And everybody did it voluntarily. So that's my answer to that question. Okay, let's see, Marcy. The local media has ignored the Libertarian Party. What can be done to give more exposure to the Libertarian Party? Wait, I'm losing. Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. I figured out what I was doing. It was scrolling down automatically, so I'm missing some questions. So I need to go back. Okay, let me go back to the ones I missed here. All right, this is from Lissa. No, from Carl. I'm sorry. What do you think about Larry Sharpe being the vice presidential pick? Well, I like Larry. I mean, Larry's a great guy. I mean, fantastic guy. And every time we've gotten together, we just have the best time. And he puts on just a great show when he's selected to be the fundraiser or the moderator or the MC. He's fantastic. And you wouldn't find a more devoted libertarian than Larry is. And he's done fantastic work for the party and the movement, and then running for governor. And he had a nice return there. Where I disagree with Larry is that to me, his vision is down here among the reform crowd, that he wants to reform the welfare state. And you can see this in his campaign platform. When he ran for governor, he's got a 3,000 word white paper on how to make the public schools work in New York. I mean, this is, to me, way down in the weeds, you know. I think as libertarians, and again, this is that dichotomy between the reform wing of the Libertarian Party and what I say is the liberty wing, because reform of infringements on liberty, again, is not freedom. Freedom is the dismantling of infringements on freedom. So in education, for example, I wouldn't even think of putting a 3,000 word white paper on how to make public schooling work. I believe in the separation of education and the state. That's the case I would make as the LP presidential nominee. I would not just settle if I was asked in an interview about education. Well, I want to abolish the Department of Education. That's boring to me. And even the Republicans, some Republicans call for the abolition of the Department of Education. I would go further and say, look, a free society is necessarily one where you separate school and state the way our ancestors separated church and state, where you get rid of all government involvement in education. And so Larry can't go there. Larry's down. Now, I'm sure he'd say abolish the Department of Education, but then he'd say, but we got to keep education at the local level in the hands of government. And that's my beef with him, is that he, I think it's much better to run a campaign that's based on liberty, that says, hey, what does it mean to be free? And then what is the role of government in a free society? And once we get people to focusing on those two questions, then we're not here as libertarians trying to make their socialist system work. And that's what public schooling is. It's a socialist system. But that's what the reform wing of the party and the movement, that's why they're so excited about Amash. Amash is your archetypical reformer, that, he's gonna reform the welfare state. He wants to be president so he can do a better job. Well, when you've got a bad system, it doesn't matter who you put in charge of it. You could put the saint of the world or the most brilliant person in the world in charge of a bad system. It doesn't make any difference. It's not going to work. I don't want to tell people, vote for me because I can make this system work. No, I want them to vote for me because I favor a free market system. I favor liberty. And therefore you have a different system. So Larry's a great guy. I just wish he would raise his vision to a higher level and talk in terms of what it really means to be free, rather than settle for some kind of warmed over Republican light type of paradigm. Okay, from Paul, how do you think we can prompt those whose lack of responsibility and defer to government to appreciate libertarian philosophy? That's a good question. I think the most important thing is to stand on principle and show people what freedom means. I mean, it means responsibility, because obviously, if government's not there to bail you out or take care of you or provide your retirement or your education or your food or your housing, then by definition, you're responsible. And so this scares a lot of people. I mean, freedom, if you really look at freedom objectively, it's a scary thing, because I'm like, my gosh, you mean government's not going to be my daddy anymore? And that scares people. They want to be like a child adult. They want to have that sense that government is there taking care of them. Henry David Thoreau made reference to this. I think it was in his essay, Civil Disobedience, where he said, people just have to hear that hum of the government machinery to make sure that everything's okay. And so, and you see people trading their liberty for security, and they lose both. So I think the main thing is to stand for liberty and have no doubts that liberty works. You see, I think a lot of times the reason that the reform crowd, or one of the reasons the reform crowd won't call for liberty, is that they themselves are afraid of freedom. They really think that if you abolish Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid today, that there would be old people dying in the streets, or sick people dying in the streets, and hospitals and doctors would say, kick them out, because they really think that's what a free society would do. Well, that's ridiculous. You'd never see any of that. I grew up in the poorest city in the United States, Laredo, Texas. And every day in the 50s and 60s, doctors' offices were filled with poor people. And there was never a case of a doctor rejecting a patient for inability to pay. Never, at least none that I ever heard of. The local hospital, Mercy Hospital, was a Catholic hospital. They handled free cases too for the poor. I mean, this is what genuine charity is about. But if we libertarians are scared of freedom, how do we expect to communicate that freedom to others? Now, there are going to be people that say, I don't want responsibility. I don't want freedom. I want the government to take care of me. Okay, don't bother with them. Just bypass them and go and talk to other people and try to reach a critical mass of people that then bring this gigantic paradigm shift to liberty. And that means just talking about liberty. If we libertarians are not going to talk about liberty, how do we expect people to think about liberty? Like I talked earlier about educational liberty. Well, if all we do as libertarians is talk about how to make public schooling work, or advocate school vouchers, which are really just another socialist scheme. They steal money from one group of people to fund the education of another group of people. And their objective is to make the public schooling system work. How are people supposed to think about genuine liberty if you don't make the case? Now, you can make the case and you might shock people. They might reject you out of hand and say that's outrageous, but you never know. I mean, look at me. Remember I told you I discovered libertarianism? I mean, the day before I discovered libertarianism, I was an ardent Democrat, an ardent liberal, and then I discovered it. So you never know what people's reaction is going to be. I think what's important is you just consistently make this case for liberty. All right, let's see now. Okay, I got the Federal Reserve already. I got that one. Running mate, got that one. Okay, here, this one's from Thomas. So you win, you are inaugurated. I like your style, Tom. And you sit down at the desk in the Oval Office. What's the first thing you sign? Pardons for all nonviolent offenders in the federal system, including Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, Ross Ulbricht, and every single criminal defendant especially in the federal penitentiaries that was convicted of a nonviolent offense. And this, of course, would encompass many, many African Americans in the drug war. I mean, I consider the drug war not only one of the most deadly, destructive government programs, corrupt government programs in U.S. history. It's also among the most racially bigoted. In fact, I consider it the most racially bigoted government program since segregation. The noted academician Michelle Alexander calls it the new Jim Crow. And that's exactly the way I feel. It's just Jim Crow, because it gives the bigots in government the opportunity to exercise their bigotry in what appears to be a legitimate manner. Now, I'm not saying all cops and all judges are bigots. We know they're not, but there are some there. And when you have a system that enables people to exercise bigotry legally and legitimately, it's going to attract bigots. And so you do have bigoted cops, you do have bigoted judges. In part of my campaign in North Carolina, I came across the case of a guy named Michael Holmes that he's in his 50s now, he's still in jail. When he was 22 or 23, he got, for a nonviolent drug offense, just selling coke, I think it was, he got a 200-year jail sentence. I mean, that's just vicious. It's just absolutely vicious. I mean, who lives to be 200 years? What was that judge thinking? And he's still in jail. I would pardon all nonviolent offenders, especially the drug cases, and I'd do that immediately. All right, let's see what we got here. Jolly, what would you move to return all? Okay, we've already paid that. Okay, answered that. How do you plan to convince R&D people unhappy with the status quo in their parties, but aren't sold on voting for libertarians? I'm not really optimistic about convincing R&Ds of anything. I believe that the Republican and the Democratic parties and conservatism and progressivism in terms of philosophy are responsible for the plight in which our nation finds itself. And if I were made the nominee, I would go after both of them. They are both jointly responsible. Conservatism is as morally a bankrupt philosophy as progressivism. And they're both jointly responsible for all the crises and chaos and immorality in which we find ourselves, political immorality in this land. And so I'd go after both Democrats and Republicans. All right, well, where does that leave us? Okay, I don't have a lot of hope that Democrats and Republicans are going to come and vote for me after I tell them that they're the ones responsible for what has happened to this country, our destruction of our liberty and our well-being. But there's a lot of people who don't vote. And that's a great thing of encouragement for me, because those are people mostly that are disgusted with both parties. They know that both parties are crooked and corrupt. They know this whole system's crooked and corrupt. They don't even want to participate in the system by sanctioning it. And I don't blame them. I'd never vote for the lesser of two evils. I would target also younger people like 55 and below and say, look what they're telling you with this massive taxation and this massive coerced charity. They're telling you that you're a bad people and you can't be trusted with that $2 trillion, that they have to take it from you through your withholding and income tax every month that you never even get to see, because they're telling you you're a bad people, that you can't be trusted with freedom. Well, okay, once younger people start figuring that out and they say, he's right. Why can't we keep our own money? We can take care of our own parents. I mean, and that's when it becomes meaningful. When your parents fall into need and they get in trouble and you're making some good money now because you're not paying income tax anymore. You're getting to keep everything. Remember, that was our American system for more than 100 years. You're able to save money, you save gobs of money to get you through an emergency like the one we're facing. Unlike today where, people don't have the money to get through 1 or 2 months. You'd have gobs of savings. Then your parents get into trouble. You've got nest egg there to help them out. And that's when help becomes meaningful. Not when you do it through the Internal Revenue Service by payment of taxes and the Social Security Administration or the Medicare Administration. I've been hit with this, oh, Jacob, you're heartless. You're not showing compassion. Where is the compassion in a system that uses the Internal Revenue Service? I mean, this is one of the most evil, tyrannical agencies in the history of this country. And somebody's going to tell me that it reflects how good and compassionate they are? That's ridiculous. All right, so I target young people by showing them that they have a right to be free and that I trust them. They just need to start trusting themselves. I target African Americans for what Democrats and Republicans have done to them with the drug war. I would target Hispanics based on what Democrats and Republicans have done with the immigration system, which is a socialist system that comes with a police state that has brought death and suffering to countless people. And so when you add up all those groups, I think that's a much more promising place to begin to get votes rather than the Democratic and Republican parties. All right, Rob, what are your views on the Fed and what is your role and their role in the economy with you as president? Well, I already answered that question, but essentially abolish the Fed, get rid of it. It's a socialist institution. It's based on the concept of monetary central planning, which is a socialist concept, central planning is. And then separate money in the state. Don't even restore the gold coin, silver coin standard, which would be a second best system. But let the free market decide it. You know, the free market produces the best of everything. So you probably would have a combination of gold coins, silver coins, Bitcoins, cryptocurrencies, American Express banknotes. I mean, and then the market would ferret out and start gravitating to the one that's most popular, but it doesn't have to be the only one. You could have competing currencies. And Friedrich Hayek wrote about this in his essay, The Denationalization of Money. For those of you that are not familiar with Hayek, he was a Nobel Prize winning libertarian economist. And then there's also great stuff written by Austrian economists on like Larry White on competing currencies and a lot of other Austrians. So that's the way I'd handle the Fed. All right, Keith, if you bring them home and discharge, how will they become employed with 90% of all manufacturing overseas? Well, in a free society, people have a right to put their manufacturing wherever they want to. I mean, that's part of freedom. The reason businessmen will open up a business overseas is because they find it's efficient to do so. They can lower their costs, which then means lower prices for consumers. Foreign businesses do the same thing. They invest over here because they find it efficient to do so. So you might have Toyota opening a business here. All this is for the good. I mean, it doesn't matter where a business opens up his businesses. It's all for the good of people everywhere because they're lowering costs, and lowering costs then enables them to sell products at lower prices. Now, in a genuine free market economy, you always have plentiful jobs for everybody. Even though some manufacturing may be overseas, there's other things that are going on. There's service industries. There's things that don't involve a manufacturing place or an industry place. I mean, for example, take the automobile industry. Everybody always freaks out that oh my gosh, or they used to, the automobile industry might go out of business, and so you had these big bailouts. I forget when, back in the 70s or so, because it would be like unimaginable that America wouldn't have an automobile industry. Well, this is ridiculous. I mean, if you look like Hong Kong doesn't have an automobile industry. And if you look at it before the communist takeover, Hong Kong was one of the most economically vibrant, dynamic economies in the world. Why? Because they didn't have any regulations. And they just had virtually no government control. They were on a rock. There's no automobile industry there, no manufacturing stuff. But there's always jobs in a vibrant, dynamic free market system. So here, keep in mind Bastiat's concept of what is seen and unseen. You have all these soldiers coming home. I think it's about 165,000. And you think, oh my gosh, you're going to put $165,000 165,000 people in the private sector. Oh my gosh, people are going to be dying in the streets. Well, that's not the way freedom works. You see, those 165,000 people, how are they getting their money? Okay, remember, Uncle Sam is not your rich uncle. It doesn't have all this money under the bed, It has to get its money from someplace to pay those soldiers and to pay for the bombs and the missiles and so forth. And so let's assume that it's $500 billion. That $500 billion is being taxed from the private sector to fund them. So if you don't need them anymore, then you don't need to tax that $500 billion anymore. So that $500 billion is now sitting in the private sector again. Well, that $500 billion is a lot of money that's going to be used to buy automobiles, clothing, vacations, all sorts of things. I mean, imagine if all of a sudden you got a huge raise like that. You would do something with your money, even if you save it. That means productive capital for businesses. That produces all the jobs that are going to be hiring these 165,000 soldiers. Here's the other thing. Now the soldiers are not just in the private sector sucking this $500 billion out. They're now in the private sector producing wealth. So it's a double positive effect. You've got the people who were being taxed to fund them that are now keeping their money, and you've got the soldiers in the private sector producing wealth. Doubly positive effect for the American people and for everybody in society. All right. Since you're not in favor of Medicaid, what are some alternatives you would provide for medical expenses for the poor and children? All right, let me answer that question by telling you about the way things were when I was growing up. Now, this is before Medicaid, so it gives you a pretty good idea of what life was like before Medicaid and Medicare as well. We had the finest healthcare system in history, just like we had the finest monetary system in history. We had a system where doctors didn't have anything to do with Medicare and Medicaid because it didn't exist. And it was a system where prices were so low that it boggles the mind. I'm talking about medical prices. Now, one of the big issues today is pre-existing conditions. Well, should insurance companies be required to cover people with pre-existing conditions? That wasn't even an issue in the 1950s and 60s before Medicare and Medicaid. Why? Because there was no medical insurance. No, hardly anybody had it. Some people had catastrophic to protect against, like cancer or something, but nobody had major medical insurance. Why? Because prices were so low and so stable that it was like a yawner. It was like going to the grocery store. Going to the doctors was like going to the grocery store. I mean, how many people have insurance to protect against the soaring prices of groceries? Nobody does. They don't even sell such an insurance. If you went to an insurance agent and said, man, I'm really worried about grocery prices soaring, which we might have to start worrying about with what the Fed's doing with the printing of the money. But, the grocery store owner would say, what's wrong with you? Well, that's the way it was back then, that prices were really low and stable. So most people could afford them. I mean, it's like no big deal, in other words. Well, what about the poor in Laredo? Remember, I told you that I grew up in the poorest city in the United States. This was according to the Census Bureau. And I mean, I'm telling you, people were poor in Laredo. I mean, I saw literally people living in shacks over in the barrios or the ghettos of Laredo, especially in the south part of town. And as poor as Laredo was, it was nothing compared to Nuevo Laredo, which was right across the river. I mean, we were literally on the Rio Grande. It was one great big metropolitan area that was divided by a river. But on the other side of the river, I mean, I've never seen poverty. I remember as a kid just being shocked the first time I went into Nuevo Laredo and I saw how people lived. It was just a shocker for me. And one of the intriguing questions, of course, is why did people have a higher standard of living on the Laredo side as compared to the Mexican side? That's a whole separate question. But the doctor's offices were filled with poor people. Then doctors knew they couldn't pay. They were positive they couldn't pay. I mean, sometimes they'd bring in tamales or something like that. A lot of the patients were from Nuevo Laredo. They would just come over to get medical treatment. The doctors knew they couldn't pay. No doctor turned them away. This is how you handle the poor in a free society. You just rely on the doctors to do that. Now, is that scary? Well, yeah, because I mean, what if all the doctors said, we hate the poor, needy, and disadvantaged, and we're just not going to treat them? But that's not the way freedom works. You can always count on the free people to do the right thing. Not everybody, but freedom entails the right to say no. If you're not free to say no, then you're not free. But I have no doubts that in a free system, you could rely on doctors. I'll give you an example of this. My dentist, who's now retired here in Virginia, he and other dentists got together and formed an association to provide free dental care to poor people on a weekly basis. And they would rotate every Thursday. They would rotate. And because there's no Medicare or Medicaid for dental work. So they just did this voluntarily. They did it because they felt it was the right thing to do. This is what we need to recapture. This is what the welfare state has done in America. It has caused people to lose their faith in freedom and free markets, and faith in others, and faith in themselves, and a faith in God. And that's why they look to the state to be their daddy, their caretaker, and in many instances, their God. I mean, it's amazing how people have exalted the federal government to this, like, benevolent creature that helps us out and takes care of us. Sure, by stealing money from people through the Internal Revenue Service. So that's how we handle a free market, handle this thing. If you abolish Medicare and Medicaid, immediately prices would plummet. I mean, plummet. You've eliminated this huge artificial, fraudulent demand on the system. They would plummet back to low prices, stable prices like they were before Medicare and Medicaid. Most people would be able to afford them. For the truly needy and the truly disadvantaged, you rely on doctors to do that, hospitals to do it on a voluntary basis, or wealthy people that contribute to a foundation to help poor people get medical care. This is the type of thing we've got to recapture in this country: a faith in freedom, and a faith in ourselves, and a faith in others. And for me, a faith in God. Okay, let's see. Where do we go here? I got that one. Okay, does the federal, this is from Michael. Oh, no, wait a minute. I'm sorry. This is from Marcy. I'm not sure I ever got this one. The local media has ignored the Libertarian Party. What can be done to get more exposure for the candidates? My strategy is totally different from what most people's is. I think you get your media coverage by adhering to principles in this Libertarian Party, because they're dramatic principles. I mean, I've been attacked in this presidential race as being too radical, which I find really interesting, because this is the Libertarian Party. And all I'm doing in this race is adhering to libertarian principles. That's all. I mean, I'm not going outside the paradigm and adopting a non-libertarian principle. Every principle I've enunciated in this presidential race is a principle of libertarianism. One of my opponents says, he's too radical, he's going to cost us votes, which is really an indictment of libertarianism. He's saying libertarianism is too radical a philosophy. We need to make it more Republican, which I just find it kind of amusing. I say stand strictly on principle, and that will generate your publicity, because they'll attack you. I mean, look, nobody's going to attack you if you say, I want to privatize Social Security with a mandatory investment account where young people can opt out, but are mandated to invest money in an array of government-approved investment vehicles, and are going to be taxed to phase out over the next 40 years the people on Social Security today. Nobody's going to pay attention to that. I mean, by the time you finish, they're going to be asleep. But I guarantee you, you say, I favor abolishing Social Security today. That's what generates the attacks. And that's a good kind of publicity. When people are attacking you for your libertarian principles, then it gives you the opportunity to respond. And it gets people to start thinking about it. People think, wow, this guy wants to abolish Social Security. Oh, let me check out what this is about. I mean, this is the third rail of politics, man. What's this guy doing, But then that gives you the opportunity to make the case for why younger people should have the opportunity for freedom to keep that $2 trillion and so forth. I'll give you an example. I just got attacked by New York Magazine online. That's what it's called, New York Magazine. And this is really funny. The writer says, I think he was talking about the Amash entry of the race, and he says, he's referring to my candidacy. He says, Jacob Hornberger wants to abolish the Federal Reserve. What an untimely suggestion. Now, I mean, this is really funny, because he obviously thinks that libertarians are like Democrats and Republicans, who are chameleons that change their positions in accordance with their environment. They change their colors in accordance with their environments. Like, I just recently adopted this position, and oh, how unlucky is Hornberger to adopt this position at this time in crisis. Well, I've held this position for 30 years. You could go back to the very first year of the Future of Freedom Foundation, where I serve as president. And I should emphasize that they don't endorse my candidacy because they're a nonprofit. But we were calling for abolishing the Fed back in 1990. This This is not a new position. But what's even more amusing about this thing is that this guy honestly thinks that the Federal Reserve is doing a benefit to the American people. I mean, this is almost a walking example of why we should get rid of public schools and state-supported universities and so forth. I mean, this guy ought to sue his professors and his school teachers for educational malpractice. The Federal Reserve is just cranking up the printing presses. Remember, the federal government doesn't have any money. It's broke. I mean, before the coronavirus crisis hit, they had $23 trillion in debt that you're responsible. Every taxpayer is responsible for that debt. And when that debt comes due, they're going to come collecting it. And every taxpayer right now owes $200,000 is his share of that debt. And how many American families have that? Let's say 400,000 if they're married. I don't think very many, but the government's a vicious government. When it needs its money, it's going to come collecting, and it's going to seize whatever it can, possibly even 401ks and retirement accounts, replace them with worthless bonds. So this guy thinks that, oh, the Federal Reserve is doing this great job because it's sending out all this free money to people. This is just a crooked, corrupt process. He doesn't understand that. But by my taking that position, notice it generates the publicity. And then it gives me a chance to respond to it. And that's why, one of the reasons I would love this winning this nomination, because there's nothing I love more than getting attacked based from my libertarian principles, because I can handle it. I mean, I know how to make the case for a free society, for getting rid of the Fed and a free market monetary system. Bring it on. And I have no doubts that the statist mainstream press, especially if we start climbing in the polls, would come after my views with a vengeance, and I would love it. So I think that's what generates the publicity. Adhere to strict principles. Forget all the reforms, the white papers, how to make public schooling work. Nobody cares about that. It's boring. The excitement for me is libertarianism. I mean, pure libertarianism, getting in there and arguing why people should be free, why they should be free to keep everything they earn and decide for themselves what to do with it. That was our heritage. Why free markets work, why they're moral. Explaining what we're in this. I mean, who goes to the barricades for the sake of a cost-benefit analysis or a 3,000-word white paper? I mean, nobody goes to the barricades for that. Why do people go to the barricades? They go to the barricades because they want to be free. That's what generates that drive to go to those barricades. Okay, let's see. Michael, there's a good question. Does the federal government have a role in dealing with negative externalities like climate change, for example? I say absolutely not. Now, I'm not an expert in climate change, I confess to you, but you see, because it's never made a difference to me one way or the other, that, it's really a scientific decision. Every so often I think, well, maybe I ought to read a couple of books on it, but it doesn't matter to me because I don't want the federal government involved anyway. Even if there is something to be said that, human beings are causing the climate change and so forth. The last thing I want to do is give up my freedom. And that's what it involves. I mean, these grandiose totalitarian schemes are about giving up your freedom to address the problem. I don't want to give up my freedom for anything. And the Environmental Protection Agency is one of the most tyrannical and destructive agencies we've ever had in this country. I mean, they have destroyed people and gone after them and prosecuted them and jailed them and fined them. And you can't tell me that these bureaucrats have this love for the environment and stuff. And I love the environment. I've done a lot of hiking in my life. I'm a cyclist. But the last thing I want is government to be involved in these things. Many years ago, I read a book about all the damage that the federal government's done to the national parks. Why? Because it's public ownership. You go down in South Texas and go onto a ranch in South Texas, like a 20,000 acre ranch or thing. I guarantee you will find everything pristine because private owners take care of things. Even when they have oil wells on their ranches down there, they make sure the oil company does everything very meticulously. And it's all written in the lease and everything. Private ownership is the best. Now, are there externalities? Is there air pollution? Water pollution, to me, it's a no-brainer, is privatize the waterways. You put waterways in private ownership, I guarantee you, they will go to court immediately and get an injunction against anybody polluting what they own. But is there air pollution and other externalities? Yeah, I say that's what a judicial system is for. Let people bring suits against the malefactor, maybe class action suits if it's affecting a lot of people. Let them litigate it in a court of law where there's evidence and there's experts and testimony and a jury trial to decide disputed facts. And that to me is a much better way to handle environmental issues through nuisance law or trespass law, rather than to have this government bureaucracy that destroys liberty, and I think it often at times destroys the environment as well. I should also mention that in this regard, you've got the interstate highway system. People sometimes ridicule us, Republicans and Democrats, because part of our libertarian paradigm is to privatize the highways and the roads and so forth. But I think it's worth noting that the interstate highway system was this huge socialist boondoggle. It's the biggest socialist boondoggle, I think, in the history of the country, and at least non-military. And it was inspired, ironically enough, by Adolf Hitler's Autobahn. But notice what it did. It not only destroyed all the towns and all the businesses. I mean, there were people suffering, going bankrupt, because the roads used to go through their towns. And as soon as the interstate highway system opened up, those businesses just went out of business overnight. It caused a lot of economic devastation for people, bankruptcy and so forth. Also eminent domain that destroyed long established neighborhoods. But it also was a free subsidy to the automobile industry. I mean, if it hadn't been for that, we would have had a much more balanced system of transportation. The train industry would be vibrant. The plane industry would be more vibrant. There would be a balance of automobiles and trains and planes, and maybe something we haven't even thought of. But you have this huge boondoggle that produces all these cars. And does anybody want to guess what one of the major pollution originators is? The automobile. And so what do? Catalytic converters and gasoline this and regulations this. And I mean, you see, it's one government intervention that leads to more and more and more. And they caused it with this huge government boondoggle. All right, let's go to the next one. This is from Bobby. Are you prepared to tell Dave Smith and Robbie the Fire that a hot dog is indeed a sandwich? Well, that is a very profound question. Let me think about that for a minute. Tell Dave Smith and Robbie the Fire that a hot dog is indeed a sandwich. Well, I'm going to have to ponder that one. I may even have to do some research on it. I may have to Google that, because I got to confess, I don't know what I'm prepared to tell Dave Smith and Robbie the Fire about this issue. All right, now, next one, Joe. What's the best way to fund government? Oh, fascinating question. Okay, once you talk about what the legitimate functions of government are, especially the federal government, you're talking about minimal expenses. I mean, you're not talking about this $4 trillion operation anymore. You're talking about maybe a multi-million-dollar operation. Because once you get rid of the illegitimate functions of government, which are the national security state, restore a limited government republic with just a basic military force, get rid of the massive military industrial complex, the whole empire of military bases domestically, the CIA, the NSA, bring all the troops home. I mean, you're talking about now a minimal government system. And then a federal judiciary, which handles lawsuits and very minute criminal prosecutions like, piracy, I guess, or something that's in the Constitution. But none of this multiplicity of federal crimes where they get you on the most minute, ridiculous things. Get rid of the interstate commerce clause so they can't use as the excuse to establish all these criminal laws and regulations. And then, so now you have a system that is based on just a basic military, a judiciary, and to provide civil disputes. And then you've got criminal jurisdiction that is decentralized to the states. All right, to the police, like murder and rape and stealing. We don't want the federal government involved in those. We want the state district attorney and state grand juries and state judges to be involved in that kind of criminal justice. So when you get rid of all of the welfare state departments and all the regulatory departments, I mean, it's revolutionary here. Now we're talking about a genuinely free society. I don't know how many agent departments there are. I think like 18 or 19. And you get rid of like 17 of them, the Department of Agriculture, Energy, Commerce, education, and then the SEC and the DEA, and you just dismantle all these things and you get a limited government republic, you're talking about minimal expenses. And so how do you fund this? Well, you certainly don't need an income tax. I mean, that's the thing that needs to go first. This is a direct assault on the freedom of the individual, on the relationship between of master and servant, between the government and the citizen. I mean, there's a reason why our founding fathers had no income taxation and no IRS in the Constitution. And for the next 100 years, more than 100 years, where you kept everything you earned and charity was entirely voluntary. They understood this is an essential prerequisite to a free society. And this is one of my beefs with at least one of the presidential candidates in this race in the Libertarian Party. He believes in income taxation. He thinks it's a great thing. He likes the IRS. And I mean, this to me is shocking for a libertarian to love the income tax and the IRS. I mean, this is and along with, welfare payments that are funded by the income tax and the IRS. To me, it's just shocking. I'd get rid of all that. Now, the founding fathers favored indirect taxes because they were less intrusive. It doesn't have that direct assault like audits and confiscation and garnishment, attachments that the IRS uses to get its money without any due process of law. The IRS comes just seize whatever it wants without going to court. That you don't have that, and our founding fathers understood that, so they favored indirect taxes like excise taxes, which is essentially a sales tax on sinful things, or what are commonly considered sin or vice, like alcohol, tobacco, and so forth, or tariffs, which are essentially sales taxes on foreign goods. And of course, it's true that okay, it's intrusive on the business owner that's collecting the sales taxes, but for the customer, he never has to deal with the government. He just pays a sales tax. So that our ancestors were right on the right track. So in an imperfect world, there's no question that the indirect taxes are better than the direct one. For me, I don't think you can ever justify a free society with the initiation of force. And taxes always involve the initiation of force, even the indirect taxes. And what does that mean? That means that if you don't pay your taxes, they will come after you. And if you resist, they'll kill you. Now, we don't often think of it that way because that's just because everybody succumbs. Everybody goes along with the deal and finally pays the taxes. But if you resist all the way through and they come to seize your home, let's say, and they foreclose the lien on it, and they're now getting ready to throw you out so they can transfer possession to the new owner, and you resist with a gun, they will kill you. If you shoot at them, they will shoot at you. And so they'll call it resisting arrest. But taxes are based on the initiation of force. I don't see how that can be reconciled in a free society. So my ideal, and I think one of these days, the freest society in history is going to be the one where people voluntarily fund the limited functions of government, where you still have a government, just like you would in society, but it would be limited to its essential functions. Like at the local level, you'd have the police going after murderers and rapists, but not drug dealers or porn dealers or all the stuff that does not involve the initiation of force or fraud against people. Police would be considered people's friends at this point. I mean, they'd be targeting burglars and rapists and thieves. And if that's all they're doing, targeting bad people or people that are doing bad things, not bad people, then people would look to the government to be something good. They wouldn't be criticizing it and so forth. I mean, there would be abuses, but by and large, most people believe in government. They're not anarchists. And so I think you could rely on them to fund government, just like people fund churches. Not everyone, but not everyone funds churches. And so you'd have a certain number of people that they would be donating into the fund of the city council or the federal government. And then whatever is donated, that would be their budget. I mean, there'd be no other way unless they have lotteries or something like that, or bake sales or something. But yeah, I think that ultimately the freest society in history, I may not see it, it will be one where you have government and it has a monopoly of force in society, but it relies on voluntary support from the citizens. All right, so let me see where we are here. What are your views on homeschooling? Well, I really don't take a position on different educational vehicles. I mean, clearly, homeschooling is better than public schooling. I mean, there's no doubt about that. people are not subjected to the regimentation of public schooling and the indoctrination. And I think the destruction of the love of learning that naturally comes to every kid. I mean, if there's the biggest damage, I think that's it, is what public schooling does to kids. It's really a form of Army light. I mean, when you go to the Army, they have these classes, for like in boot camp and stuff, how to shoot your gun and how to march. That's the way I see public schooling. The regimentation is exactly the same, the rules, the regulations, the bell ringing. And so people that are homeschooled, they're more independent thinking. They're not subject to that regimentation. But I don't like just advocating homeschooling. What I advocate is a free market educational system. Because while homeschooling is better than public schooling, there may be a lot better educational vehicles than homeschooling. For one thing, a lot of parents are not competent to homeschool, and they don't feel that they're competent. And so a free market would bring into existence educational vehicles, the likes of which we can't even imagine, because you'd have educational entrepreneurs flooding the market saying, I'm offering this for your kid. I'm offering this for your kid. I'm offering this for your kid. And so you'd have, customers who are the families being able to choose from a broad array of products. And there may be tutors, there may be, groups of tutors. There may be music schools that specialize only in music, or one that specializes only in karate. And you may go to 2 or 3. There may be workplace schools where the employer hires the best teachers around. And so the employees come and bring their children to work with them, and they're being taught while the people are working. You just don't know what a free market's going to bring. So I think instead of, concentrating on why we should, promote homeschooling, we're much better off, including the homeschoolers, advocating a free market educational system, because the free market, again, produces the best of everything. And that's really the only solution to this educational morass. All right, here's Daniel. How can you possibly garner enough support to get your ideology to have a spotlight in the race? Well, now that question raises the notion of the power of ideas and the power of ideals and principles, ideology, philosophy. So we're so accustomed to these political campaigns being down in the muck of just, nasty personal attacks. And we're going to see loads of it in this presidential race. I mean, the Democrats are going after Trump in a visceral level, a personal level. I mean, we've seen it for 3 years in this op-eds and editorials and articles, websites, social media, that Donald Trump's a rotten human being. He's a liar. He's just this and he's that. And the personal attacks are going to go, and they're going to go in both directions. And I have no interest in that kind of campaign. I got nothing against Donald Trump on a personal level. I mean, I don't know the guy, but that just doesn't interest me, that level of battle. To me, it's just irrelevant. I mean, we're all bad people to a certain extent. We're good people too. You've got, everybody's a sinner in that sense. We're all fallen in that sense. And what we really need to talk about is systems. The reason this country's in the plight it's in is not because of Donald Trump being a bad person, or Joe Biden or Barack Obama being bad people. They're all good people as far as I'm concerned. They just got a bad system. And the reason they have a bad system is their philosophy is bad. Their conservative philosophy is bad. Their liberal philosophy is bad. And their philosophy is what has produced this bad system. When you have a bad system and good people, the bad system's going to win out. And so what you've got to do, this is what I want to do with the American people, is wage a whole different kind of campaign in this race. Now, okay, the LP can play it safe. They want to play it safe, they can nominate Amash. I mean, that's a safe. The guy's a congressman, and he's going to run this LP presidential race as he runs his congressional races. Okay, safe. I'm going to make this public policy proposal that's going to give families a $1,200 check, and he's going to get out there and say, yeah, we libertarians have brought you a monthly check, vote for us. And that's safe. It's a reform. It's what the reform crowd calls a public policy prescription, or a program based on choice, because it gives people choice that they have this free money. To me, that's just boring. I mean, just boring. It's just your standard Republican light campaign, Republican-esque campaign. So I say, let's do something bold. Now, will that get the 3 or 4%? Absolutely. I have no doubts about that. You run that kind of safe campaign, you'll get it. And there, there'll be people celebrating. Oh man, we got it up from 3% to 4%. I'm sitting there saying, who cares? I mean, like, we've been in existence 49 years and we're celebrating a 3% return. I mean, that's sad. That is really sad. But that's what happens when you play it safe with these Republican-esque campaigns. They're boring. You don't charge up your base. Nobody gets excited about it. And you don't challenge the American people in any way. The people that are Democrats or Republicans, they don't care about your reform positions. And most people that are looking at the system and saying it's crooked and corrupt, they don't care about your reform positions either, because they know that you're just trying to reform and improve the system that they consider as corrupt. Now, here's what I suggest. Let's just be bold. I'm proposing something. It's risky, no doubt about it. And one of my opponents says, I'm going to throw, Jacob's going to hurt the party. He's going to send us back to 1%. Like, oh, whoa, 3% to 1%. Whoa. That's ridiculous. When you act boldly, yeah, you may drop back to 1% or 0.5%, but you got a chance for the big payoff. Nothing ever comes to you in life by playing it safe, not the big stuff. To get the big payoff, you've got to roll the dice and you got to act with boldness. And that's what I'm proposing here. Let's do something bold. Let's go to the American people with a pure libertarian campaign. I mean, we're called the party of principle, right? So let's do that. I mean, what does that really mean, that party of principle? We have the motto, but how many people, really think about it? I mean, maybe we should change our motto to the party of expediency, or the party of vote getting, or the party of watered down principles. Or I say the party of principle means you adhere to principle, no matter what the cost. Even if it costs you votes, you adhere to principle. Otherwise, why would you be called the party of principle? Okay. And so I say, let's do that. Let's take a big risk. Let's roll the dice. Let's act boldly by running a campaign that is based purely 100% on libertarian principles. Take the battle to the American people on a philosophical level, a ideological level, a level of ideals and principles. Well, when was the last time you saw that kind of campaign? I mean, I don't think you've seen it in your lifetime. Not engaging in personal attacks, not getting in the muck and having food fights with President Trump over impeachment and quid pro quos and obstruction of justice and impeachment and all this other nonsense. Go to the American people on a philosophical level and say, this is what we libertarians are fighting for. This is what we have devoted our lives to. This is why we want this. We want a free society for you and your family and for us. And this is what freedom means. And you carve out the different areas of what freedom means in an economic sense, in an educational sense, healthcare sense, a monetary sense. And then you say, this is the way. You show them that this is the way out of this crisis, this coronavirus crisis. It's the only way out. It's the only way out of the immigration crisis, the healthcare crisis, the drug war crisis. And now you're facing people with a life or death choice. Because you can say, and this is what I would say, if you like the direction this country is heading in and has been heading in and where it is today, vote for Biden or Trump. Doesn't matter. You're going to get the same thing. You want out of this crisis. There's only one way out, and that's libertarianism. And here's why. And then you make that case. Now, if somebody says, Jacob, I've studied your philosophy, I've examined it, I've looked it over, and I'm not for it. I want government to take care of me. Okay. That's fine. No, nobody guarantees us success in life, but you go to others. And what you're trying to do is garner a critical mass of people that say, you know what? I never thought about this before. This is a philosophy I really like. And I'm joining up with these libertarians. And then we grow and grow and grow. And all of a sudden the shift takes place and we grow in the polls and so forth. I mean, think about the Bill of Rights. Think about that First Amendment. These people weren't thinking about how to improve the public church system. They weren't thinking about how to put a voucher system in public churches. They didn't worry about what the reaction of people was going to be if they advocated the separation of church and state, which was the most radical idea or one of the most radical ideas in history. They said, this is what we want to go for. And you had regular people. I mean, the people that drafted these things were just regular people like you and me. This is what I'm going to take to the American people. Let's take it to their campaign and get out of the muck of all the personal attacks and stuff and battle this thing where we are strongest as libertarians. What is our comparative advantage here? They have the money, they have the power, they can keep us out of the ballot in all these states. We have what they don't have. We have principles, we have ideals, we have sound ideas on liberty. These are our weapons. And all too often, we have not employed those weapons. We use their weapons of, warmed over republicanism. I say, let's use our weapons in this campaign and let's take this battle to them. Let's go into this battle with our swords and our shields and go into battle against them with principles, ideas, and ideology and philosophy, and just challenge Americans at an entirely different level, a level that they're not accustomed to. And that's why I want to run this campaign of principle for the party of principle. Okay. What will you do to draw a swing in non-voters? Well, I think I've already made that case, is that you make the case for the virtues of liberty from a philosophical standpoint. You show them the virtues of libertarianism, why it's a moral philosophy. I think it's the greatest philosophy that's ever lived. I mean, when I discovered this philosophy, my whole life changed. This is an exquisite philosophy. It has an internal consistency that's beautiful. It's like a Beethoven symphony or something. And we make that case to voters and non-voters. I love non-voters because they get it. I didn't vote for many, many years. I would never vote for the lesser of two evils. Now I vote only for libertarians, but some of the libertarian candidates, they just a warmed over version of Republicans, but I hold my nose and I go in there and I vote for them. But I wish every libertarian would take the position of, hey, let's go in this era right now. Let's go for liberty. Just make the case for liberty all across the board, all the think tanks, all the educational foundations. Forget the reform, stuff. Go only for liberty, dismantling this and separating this. And that's how I would go after the swing and the non-voters. I would make the case to them why they should come in to this electoral process, why they should come and join up with us libertarians, because we're not trying to fix this crooked and corrupt system. We're trying to replace this crooked and corrupt system with freedom and free markets. That's the case I would make. Okay, Ruman, why is capitalism being criticized so much nowadays among kids? Oh, good question. Well, I'll tell you why. Because kids are being taught that what we live under is a capitalist system. If you're taught all your life that you're growing up in capitalism, and then you see crises in immigration, healthcare, out of control debt, out of control spending, death and suffering all over the Middle East and Afghanistan, drug war that's killing countless people, and crooked and corrupt and racially bigoted to boot, and a crooked and corrupt monetary system. And then you've got a very high suicide rate, especially among young people, which is, I think, your greatest sign that something's fundamentally wrong in this country. President Trump for 3 years has been, up to the coronavirus crisis, has been asking people to judge his presidency by two things: the stock market and the unemployment rate. And that's the way things were going for 3 years. Nothing else mattered. That he had made America great again, but with the stock market and the unemployment rate. And I kept saying, what happens when the stock market crashes? Oh, it's not going to crash, not going to crash. And I said, yeah, but if it does, I think he's going to blame it on everybody else. No, he wouldn't do that. Well, then it crashed, okay, with the coronavirus thing. And so now they're all saying, well, he's not responsible. He's not responsible. So in other words, he gets a credit for being a good central planner when the stock market is going up. But then when it crashes, it's not his fault. It's the Federal Reserve's fault or the coronavirus fault. Well, they told him that there was a possibility of pandemic right when he came into office, and he ignored it because the stock market was going up. But there's a much more fundamental thing going on here. Even if there had been no coronavirus crisis, he'd be saying right now, elect me because I've got the unemployment rate down and the stock market up. But look at the suicide rate among young people. It's soaring. How do you explain that? Okay, I can understand older people, I don't agree with it, but I can understand why older people sometimes commit suicide. Their dreams have been dashed in life, and they've got financial problems or marital problems or kid problems, or there's a death in the family and the grief is enormous. And they just say, I can't take this anymore. I'm checking out. Like I say, I don't agree with it. I think, counseling can do a lot of good here. But young people, This is the start of the great adventure from birth to death. What are they checking out of life for? Well, I think they look at life and they say it sucks. It sucks because you see, it's freedom. They're indoctrinated with the notion that this is freedom. And if you think freedom, and this freedom is the best there is, I mean, obviously, and they're sitting there thinking, well, if this is the best there is, this sucks. But if they were realizing that it's not freedom, it's the opposite of freedom, then all of a sudden they might say, oh, well, let me check out this freedom thing then. And so this is what the problem is. You know, today I got attacked big time by a bunch of leftist Biden supporters because I said, you know, it's Trump's, I linked to an article on Facebook that said Trump's economic fascism, which is what he's doing when he's ordering these businesses to produce things. It's classic economic fascism, leaving ownership of businesses in private hands, but ordering them what to do. And then I said, it's Trump's economic fascism versus Biden socialism. And all these Biden supporters says, ha ha, Biden a socialist? Are you kidding me? Biden's a capitalist. And so they got really upset when I said, really? How about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public schooling, immigration controls, Federal Reserve? These are all socialist institutions. Medicare, Medicaid, these are all socialist institutions, but they don't want to believe that. They want us to think that this is all capitalism. So when you see all this dysfunctionality in society, we libertarians, it's like a no-brainer. You've had this welfare state, warfare state way of life for at least the 1930s. I mean, that's what the Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal revolution was about, converting America to a welfare state funded by a massive income tax, which came into existence in 1913, along with the Federal Reserve that destroyed the constitutional money. So you've got this huge dysfunctional system, the Great Society, Lyndon Johnson, massive what we call a welfare state, which is a socialist system. It uses government to take money from one group of people by force and give it to another group of people. This is the Marxian concept, from each according to ability to each according to need. Now, it's not the pure socialist model where the government owns everything like in Cuba or North Korea. It's what's called welfare state socialism. And then you've got the military socialism too. Massive military predominance in the government and in society. I mean, it's impossible to measure, but it boggles the mind how many people are dependent, directly or independent, on military largesse. So everybody's taught, well, this is capitalism. Okay. And so part of the problem we face here is talking to people about what freedom means. I mean, if I had my druthers in this campaign, I would, you know, talk to people about two questions. I'd hope to get families debating and discussing two questions every night at the dinner table. What does it mean to be free? What does that really mean? And two, what is the legitimate role of government in a free society? And I figure if people are discussing those two philosophical questions and arguing about it, debating it at home and stuff, then we've got a shot for a free society, because then they're going to figure out that this whole welfare warfare state is not freedom. And once they figure that out, then they got a choice. Do I accept it and reform it like many libertarians have? Or do I go for freedom? Do I join up with those libertarians who are committed their lives to freedom rather than reform? And now we're on our way. But a necessary prerequisite of that is to recognize what freedom is and what capitalism is and free markets. And it's not some kind of warmed over, you know, welfare warfare state. Okay, let's see. Victor, what approach would you take with college student loans and interest rates? Well, this is another example of what the government has done to people. I mean, they've induced people to go into debt to get these college loans to get an education. And, you know, I think debt can be something positive, but it can also be something enormously negative. And it's just absolutely horrible what the government's done to do this. But by the same token, I think it would be unfair to those families who have saved and paid for their children's education with cash or with savings to, you know, all of a sudden just tell these student loan people, well, you're off the hook. And especially if you continue them, because now that provides an incentive for everybody to do this instead of going through the hard work of saving and paying for an education. Everybody says, well, I'll go get the loan because they're gonna knock it off as soon as my kid graduates, and that'll be great. I'll get a free education. I think that fundamentally what we need to do is get this society on sound financial and economic foundations. Now, what does that mean? Now, notice that the young people, especially people in debt, and I've known some of these young people, and it's just an enormous burden. I mean, imagine just getting out and you owe $100,000 and you're pulling in $35,000, $40,000. You don't have money to do anything, to go to the movies or anything, because you got to pay on this debt. And you have to really scrimp. Now, notice that what I'm talking about here is a different system. Okay, I'm not going to talk in terms of what can we do about this problem to face it with the system we have, because you've got an inherently defective system. It's like asking a libertarian. In other words, the government creates a big problem. And then people come up to us libertarians and say, okay, how are you going to deal with that problem? Well, our answer usually is you shouldn't have created the problem, because libertarianism doesn't purport to be a philosophy that fixes the problems of socialism and interventionism and economic fascism. We've never purported to do that. We can't tell these people how to fix their system. Nobody can. So I keep saying it's an inherently defective system. So what we need to do is build a foundation for a new world here in America, okay? A different world, a better world, a world of liberty and economic liberty. So what does this mean? Well, we need to do some soul searching. So we go back to first principles. Okay, we know there were some bad principles in the founding of America. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Slavery being, of course, the worst. But there were some good founding principles. And one of those is you keep everything you earn. Everything, 100%. No more withholding at all. You calculate how much your employer is matching on the FICA, how much they're taking out of your withholding. You don't get to see it. So that's where they kind of fake you out. It used to be before World War II that there was no withholding. You would get all your money during the course of the year. And then on April 15th, you'd calculate your taxes and you'd send them the entire amount you owe. Well, the advantage of that is you could see how much you were paying in taxes, because you'd have to write a check for that amount. Well, then they'd start doing withholding and you don't see it. So it's like, you don't think of it as your money, including the employer's matching. That's your money. That money would be coming to you in terms of your employment compensation. He's willing to cover that for you, which means that he'd be willing to pay you that. Well, if you have that kind of system, now people are making a lot of money all of a sudden. And so those students that are in debt, I mean, they got a lot more money, savings to apply to that debt. They can pay it much more rapidly as compared to keeping the present system where people are working from paycheck to paycheck, or millions are working from paycheck to paycheck, and they don't even have a nest egg. We see what this system has done to millions. This coronavirus crisis is really exposing the whole New Deal, Great Society, welfare state paradigm and warfare state paradigm. Millions of people don't even have a nest egg to get them through 1 or 2 months of unemployment. That's incredible. You didn't have that in like the late 1800s. People were saving tons of money. I mean, imagine keeping 100% of what you earn. You'd go and buy things, but you'd also save a large portion of your money. And that's what was the capital that produced higher productivity and higher standards of living. So that's why I keep thinking in terms of systems, that we've got to adopt a new system in America, or systems in America. And one of those is a new economic system that gets rid of the IRS, gets rid of the income tax, restores our founding principle of keeping everything you earn. And then people have less incentive, less need to go out and borrow money. And if they are in debt, they have it much easier to repay that debt. Interest rates, leave that all to the free market. I mean, once you get rid of the Fed and you get government involvement out of the monetary field, interest rates are just established by the market. You know, this is the price of money, and the market, let the market determine that. I mean, the free market's a marvelous mechanism, and it relies on the price system. The price system is simply an information transmitting system that lets people calculate. And it's in response to supply and demand. And so that's how interest rates get set. Instead of some government bureaucracy artificially setting interest rates, which is what the Fed does, and causes all these distortions and misallocations of capital. And that's what causes these bubbles bursting and recessions and depressions and booms and busts and stuff. It's all Federal Reserve manipulation of the interest rates and the monetary supply. Get rid of all that, and then you end up with, you don't have these bubbles bursting anymore and all this. I mean, the Fed's a lot of people don't realize this because in public schools, they teach you that the Great Depression was the failure of free enterprise. That's just a lie. The Austrian school, as well as Milton Friedman, have shown that the stock market crash in 29 was what the Fed caused through monetary manipulation. They miscalculated. Even the Federal Reserve chairman, who was he, Ben Bernanke, acknowledged this in a public speech one day. It was remarkable. It was the first, as far as I know, it was the first public acknowledgement by a Federal Reserve chairman that the Federal Reserve had caused the stock market crash in 1929. And it was a truthful acknowledgement. Okay, let's see, Craig, what would you do to draw a swing? Oh, no, I already answered that. Okay, disregard, doubled up. Okay, what is profit? Where does it come from? Why should it exist? Well, a profit is simply what a business or a supplier or a seller earns on the sale of a product over and above his costs. I mean, if let's say he produces a bushel of wheat for $50 and he sells it for $100, that's a profit there. He's pocketed $50. Why should it exist? Well, first of all, because of principles of private property. A free society necessarily depends on private property. You have a right to own whatever you own. It's yours. And so you have a right, if you have a right to own it, you have a right to sell it at whatever price. And if somebody doesn't want to buy it, they think the price is too high, don't buy it. But a person's got a right to sell whatever he wants because he owns it. And also it provides an incentive. So you got the moral case for profit, but you also have the incentive case, the practical case, is that when people can earn profits, they produce things that other people want to buy. And that's something good. You take like Bill Gates, okay? Gates, okay, set aside any opinions you may have on his philosophy, but Gates decides he wants to produce software. And let's say he wants to become a multimillionaire. Well, the only way he can do that is by selling something that other people are willing to pay for. And so he says, well, okay, I'll try software. Well, so his software he sells and he makes a profit, a huge profit, multi-million dollars in profits. But he serves us consumers. He's like improved our standard of living immensely. So even if he were the most selfish person in the world, and he's not, he gives a lot of his money away. But even if he was, who cares? Look how he's benefited mankind by seeking profit. He's done it immensely. And so that's why we want profit, private property, and it provides the incentive. It improves our standard of living. It improves everybody's standard of living, both in your role as business supplier and your role as consumer. And even if you're just an employee for a business, you want that business to make a profit, because that then enables the employer to have more money to pay higher wage rates. And how do we know he's going to pay higher wage rates? Because the next business next door is doing it. And if he doesn't match it, the employees will go over there. So contrary to what the Marxians and the socialists say, there's not a conflict of interest between employers, employees, and consumers. Everybody benefits from a vibrant, dynamic, growing society and economy. Okay, Bobby, are you prepared? Oh, I already answered that. Okay. What about what is happening today with the protesters against the stay of the homeowners in Sacramento being arrested? Would you, as president, direct the attorney general to prosecute states violating the First Amendment? Well, we're seeing what's happening at the state and local level. Just what our ancestors knew, that government attracts the people who love to be little dictators. I mean, that's just the natural proclivity of people. There's people that have in their DNA to be dictators. And they know that the chances of ever becoming a national dictator are slim. Very few people get to be a national dictator. But at the state and local level, there's a much bigger chance. And you see it with mayors and so forth. And you see this dictatorial DNA coming out in so many of them, this crisis. It really is a fascinating phenomenon. Lord Acton said that power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Man, boy, are we learning that firsthand here. So yeah, it's a fascinating case of where you've got a dysfunctional healthcare system, centrally planned. That's the problem. You've got a centrally planned, which is a socialist healthcare system. Centers for Disease Control, FDA, the President's Task Force, all this central planning nonsense. And then when it doesn't work, you got shortages of masks and testing kits and defective testing kits and shortages of ventilators and what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos, which comes from central planning. Then they resort to tyranny because they can't stand the thought that their system isn't working. And that's where you get all these shutdowns and lockdowns and arrests and mandates and so forth. So again, we're talking about a different system. You know, I don't want to make anybody think that if I were this nominee that I would get in there and say, make me president so I can run this system better. No, I couldn't. Nobody can. It's a defective system. It's inherently defective. It's like a perpetual motion machine. Nobody can make it work. Not even the most brilliant person in the world. I remember one of my candidates in this race said, I would get a team of 15 of the smartest people in the country together and we'd solve this crisis. Well, it's ridiculous. I mean, that's central planning. I mean, Trump's got his task force of brilliant people. I mean, the system is bad. If I can get one, message across, you've got a bad system, economic system, healthcare system, immigration system, monetary system. You need a new system. And so you get government totally out of this thing. And then, okay, bad things happen in life. The pandemic's a bad thing, but we'd be looking to the healthcare industry for guidance and leadership. And you'd have entrepreneurs rushing into the market. And you'd have people saying, testing, everybody should be testing right now. And all of a sudden Amazon would be sending, 100 testing kits overnight delivered to every family for $2 each. That's the dynamism of a market, of a free market. And then everybody tests and the positive ones, start isolating, the healthy ones stay in business so the economy doesn't crater. And it's a much more harmonious way. Would people still die? Of course, but not at the rate they're dying today, because everybody would know who has it and doesn't have it. And people have the incentive to self-isolate. Totally different system. So would I order the attorney general to prosecute the states violating the First Amendment? No, the federal government doesn't have jurisdiction to prosecute a state official for violating the First Amendment. But people have a right to go into federal court and sue to stop the state officials from violating the First Amendment. And that's what the 14th Amendment was about. And this is one of my disputes with people in this race as well. There's libertarians that hate the 14th Amendment. I love it. I mean, I absolutely love it because it incorporates the Bill of Rights into the 14th Amendment, the Due Process Clause, and it applies it to state governments. So when state governments are violating the First Amendment or the Second Amendment and gun rights, I mean, right now I live in a state where the governor and the Democratic legislature are salivating to confiscate assault rifles. Man, I love the fact that people are able to go into federal court and have this thing declared unconstitutional, which they did in the Heller decision. I mean, Washington, D.C. Enacted a vicious gun control law, and the Supreme Court knocked it out based on the 14th Amendment. All right, Sean, what do you think about Gideon versus Wainwright and the right to publicly funded counsel for indigent criminal defendants? That's a fascinating question. I like it. I think that if you're going to have a criminal justice system, and I do believe in a criminal justice system, again, I'm not an anarcho-capitalist is known in the movement. I mean, some of my best friends are anarcho-capitalists. Don't send in the nasty emails here. I really believe that a legitimate function of government is to prosecute people for crimes, violent crimes, force or fraud and so forth, murder, rape, stealing, and so forth. But many of those are indigent people. And so I think this is a price to be paid for having a good criminal justice system, that when somebody cannot afford an attorney, that an attorney will be given to him. Now, usually what happens in these cases is that the attorney charges, it's a very minimal amount, especially compared to what attorneys make. But I wouldn't think there'd be any problem with just asking attorneys to volunteer, criminal defense attorneys to do this. And, then depending on the stock of volunteers and the case load, you could then decide, well, should we start paying lawyers to do this out of the voluntarily donated funds in the coffers of the state? But yes, I absolutely agree. The power of a state, of the government, is so enormous. And you can get a sense of that power by walking. I was a lawyer for 12 years, and you walk into a federal court, you can feel power. I mean, it is totally different from walking into a state court. It's really a fascinating thing. If you never walked into a federal court, do it sometime. You can do it. I mean, you just go in there as a spectator. and then walk into a state court and see if you notice any difference. I mean, to me, I always, when I walked in the federal court, I could feel power. And so when the state comes after somebody, it's enormous power. It's one individual against, taxes and effectively unlimited funds and good attorneys. And they're going after this one guy or one woman. And if he's poor, he doesn't have a chance unless he's got a lawyer. And that lawyer can serve as a barrier to them smashing this guy. And I love that. It's like an equalizer. Okay, Joe, it seems like you've been doing these live videos nonstop. Are you getting burnt out at all? Are you kidding? I'm eating it up, man. I am loving it. This campaign has been a transformative event in my life. I mean, and before the, I'm really enjoying it, to be honest with you. Before the big crash, I mean, I was having the time of my life. I went to 18 state conventions. I mean, I was doing like 3 conventions a weekend one time. And one time I went to the Florida convention on Friday. I attended the Friday night social, got up at 4 a.m. on Saturday, caught a 7 a.m. flight to Little Rock, Arkansas via Atlanta, where I had to change flights, and then caught an Uber to, I forget Conway, Arkansas, to attend the convention there. And it was awesome. I mean, they gave me the nicest reception. Spoke there for about 10 or 15 minutes, did a Q&A, beelined out of there, caught the Uber back to Little Rock, caught the plane, went back to Atlanta, got to Orlando in time about, I don't know, an hour later to do the presidential debate. And I was loving it, just loving it. And even the small ones. I mean, my favorite convention has been the Mississippi one. I've told people this. It was a very small convention. I was the only presidential candidate there because their delegates, they only have 4 delegates or something like that. And which was great because they gave me more time. At these other conventions that are packed with LP presidential candidates, you only get 2 minutes to give an opening statement or whatever. I got 15 or 20 minutes at the Mississippi convention. And then it was only 30 or 40 people, but they had 2 socials for a convention with 30 or 40 people. They had it in a restaurant, and which it was kind of interesting. And the restaurant sold good old fashioned home cooking, like fried chicken and lima beans. It was like heaven. And I mean, I'm a native Texan, remember? And then their business session ended before noon. I mean, how sweet is that, And then of all the great things, I buy $10 worth of raffle tickets there. And guess who wins the first place brand new iPad? I mean, it was fantastic. I didn't have an iPad, man. I've been loving this thing. Well, I was, especially when I was flying. So then the big crash came, and I was getting my batteries charged up at these conventions. I mean, you could feel the excitement. It was incredible in this party. From November to April to March, I mean, you could feel the electricity. And most of the conventions I went to, virtually all of them, before the coronavirus hit, there were many more people running for delegates than delegate slots available. It was amazing. And then the big crash comes, and it's just, I mean, I like doing these things on videos and stuff, but you can't get the energy because you can't feed off the energy of the crowd. I mean, I'm talking to y'all right now and, to a computer, I miss the energy of the crowd. And speakers love it because, when you're talking about liberty, you can feel that energy in that crowd. You can feel it and you can feed off it, and it charges up your batteries. But am I getting burned out? It's the most amazing thing. I love this. I mean, I'm having the time of my life. I really enjoy. I know I'm getting attacked. And why are you doing videos here? And why do you do this? And why, and I just smile because I'm having a good time, regardless of what the results are. I love libertarianism. I mean, that's why I called my new book. I'll do some selfish self-promotion. I was told that I've been accused of, you're in this race to sell books. I think I've sold, maybe I made a profit of $230 on my book or something like that. It's called My Passion for Liberty. And it explains my passion for this philosophy. I love libertarianism. I love it. It's a driving force in my life. I mean, second to my religion, this is the driving force in my life. It changed the course of it. So no, I'm not getting burnt out at all. It's on the contrary. I'm just getting a good start here. Okay. if we were to become a libertarian society, what kind of timetable, this is from Matt, would it take to get us there? And how would that affect our relationship with the rest of the world? Oh, interesting question. You don't know. You don't know. See, I often hear libertarians saying, oh, Jacob, we have to go slow. We have to phase out programs over a long period of time. Are you kidding me? I mean, okay, if you lived in the time of slavery, if you lived in 1855 America, would you say, oh, Jacob, just too hard. Slavery's here to stay. It's in the Constitution. Everybody agrees with it. We can't get rid of it. Let's phase it out over a 50-year period of time. That's ridiculous. I mean, you got to stand for what's right, regardless how people react. You got to stand there and say slavery's wrong. And if people get upset, that's their problem. And we got to stand here as libertarians and say the welfare, warfare, state serfdom under which we live is wrong. And if people get upset, that's their problem. We got to stand for liberty. And none of this transition, all this stuff. I mean, transition, you also remember when you transition, you're violating the libertarian non-aggression principle during the period of transition. You're violating people's rights during the period of this transition. And why not just get freedom? Like slavery, just free the slaves. Now, there were people before slavery was abolished that said, Jacob, or that would have said, Jacob, and did say that this is cruel. The slaves, this would be so cruel to slaves. They don't have a work ethic. They don't know how to start businesses. They've been slaves all their lives. And to just throw them off the plantation just like that, while they'll be starving to death. You see, it's the same thing they say about these socialist welfare state programs. Oh, there'd be people dying in the streets if you ended Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. It's the same argument. I mean, this is what socialism does. It creates this mindset of dependency, hopeless dependency. Well, guess what happened when Lee surrenders to Grant at Appomattox, or actually when the war actually formally ends? The slaves are free. The button is pushed. Okay, there's a button there, and the button is pushed that frees the slaves immediately. There's no phase out at all. Guess what happens? The slaves did fine. Blacks started opening up businesses. They started out competing whites. There's a great show on Netflix right now on, what's her name? Okay, I can't remember her name, but she's this woman that was in hairdressing. You can Google her. You just Google African-American woman, hairdresser, 1800s. And this woman's remarkable. She starts going into the hairdressing business, and she's African-American and just an entrepreneur, starts out competing everybody and becomes a multimillionaire. She ends up owning a mansion, interestingly enough, next to the mansion of the Foundation for Economic Education when it was in Irvington-on-Hudson, New York. And that's one of the reasons for Jim Crow laws, because whites were so upset that blacks were getting wealthy and out competing them in many cases, that's why they needed Jim Crow laws to impede the progress that blacks were making on their own when slavery was immediately dismantled. That's why we need to abolish these programs. You would have an economic vitality, the likes of which boggles the mind immediately from across society. Are there people that really need help? Are there people in cancer wards that are penniless? Of course. But you can count on doctors and hospitals, especially since there's no more income tax. They're making a lot of money. People are donating a lot more money. They're not going to throw people out on the streets. They're going to provide them with free health care. The wealthier people in society, the middle-class people, will make sure that happens, even if they have to donate the money to it, because all that $4 trillion is now being taken out of people's pockets to fund this monstrosity. That $4 trillion is now left in the hands and the pockets of people. That's what you've got to always keep in mind, that as difficult as everybody's having it in society, that difficulty is in large part because $4 trillion is being taken out of people's pockets. And now it's amounting to $6 trillion, and it's soon to go up to $7 or $8 trillion, all being sucked out of the private sector. That's bad news. All right, if we were to abolish the IRS, Social Security, Medicaid, what would you do with funds that are already in those programs? There's no funds in those programs. I mean, this is the indoctrination that they've subjected people to, that there's a Social Security fund, that there's a Medicare fund. This is just fraud. There is no fund. Okay, let me put it this way. Let's say that I've got a child that's going to education. He's 10 years old. And I start saving money to pay for my kid's education, college education. And I'm socking away a lot of money in my home safe. I'm not putting it in the bank. Every month I take out $1,000 out of my paycheck. I'm scrimping, and I put $1,000 into the safe. And I've got a little box, my kids' educational fund and for college. And so when he's 17, it's got, let's say, $100,000 in it, just hypothetically. Cash. I mean, $100 bills are in there. Okay. Now, in his senior year, I decide that I'm entitled to a vacation, and I've got time off at work, and I can take off 2 months, and I decide I'm going to go on a trip around the world, and I'm going to stay in the five-star resorts. And so I travel around and I use this money. Okay. I use the 100,000, my kids' education money. But here's the thing. I replace it. I put a note, a promissory note into that box. I owe you $100,000. And I put it in the box, and I put the cover on it, and I take the cash out, and I go out and spend it all for my vacation. My kid comes up to me. He's getting ready to graduate from high school. He says, Dad, how's my college fund doing? Oh, perfect. It's fully funded. Fully funded. I mean, I've got a fund. I started a fund for you, and it's fully funded. Okay. Do you see a problem here? Okay. Because in order to get the cash, the note's not going to do me any good. He can't take that promissory note to the college and say, here's my dad's promissory note for $100,000. Okay. So the note isn't exactly the same as the cash, is it? Well, that's what the government does with the so-called Social Security fund. When they tax people on Medicare taxes, Fica, whatever they call it, payroll taxes, they spend the money just like they do with income taxes. They spend it. They got bombs to pay for in Iraq and Afghanistan, Somalia. They got to replace those bombs. They got to pay the defense contractors. They got to pay, the soldiers. They got to pay Social Security recipients. That money is gone. As soon as you pay your taxes, it's gone. What they do is they create this fund, fund, I put it in quotation marks, with IOUs in there, their own IOUs. And they say, your Social, beep, you can rest assured your Social Security fund is fully funded with IOUs. Now, where do they get the money to fund those IOUs? By taxing you. I mean, so it's just a great big scam. So there's no funds in there. You got to get rid of that whole thing about, I've put money into Medicare, or put money into Social Security. That's the scam of this whole thing. It's a huge Ponzi scheme. It's all based on fraud. But if you go into the law books and you go to a lawyer and you ask him, would you examine this Social Security law, or this Medicare law, and would you tell me if they owe me any money? Every lawyer will tell you they don't owe you a dime. This is a straight welfare program. It's no different from food stamps, public housing, foreign aid. He will tell you, you can't sue. And they can abolish the program today. And you can't sue for the money that's in there that you put in there, because you haven't put anything in there. You just had taxes collected from you. All right, what part of government would be involved in our healthcare? No part of government, none. Okay, what part of government's involved in our churches? None. They don't run the churches. They don't supervise the churches. They don't monitor the churches. They don't regulate the churches. They wouldn't monitor the healthcare industry. They wouldn't regulate it. They wouldn't control it. Think of churches and then apply it to the healthcare industry. The healthcare industry, doctors and pharmacies and healthcare providers and nurses and hospitals. This is what would be running the healthcare business. The free market, the dynamism of the free market. And that's how we would be addressing a crisis to our health, a threat to our health. Government officials don't know what they're doing when it comes to health. I mean, look, you can see this. They're running around like chickens with their heads cut off. All they know is force and tyranny and oppression and dictatorship. That's all they know. They don't know anything about healthcare. The people that know about healthcare are the healthcare people. That's where we should have been putting our faith. And again, I'm talking about not under the current system, a new system. Okay, I'm not saying elect me because I can run their system better. I'm saying elect me because I'm going to bring you a better system, a system based on liberty, health, peace, prosperity, and harmony. All right, what part of government? Okay, I already got that. Also, what part of the government would oversee public education? None. Again, a total separation of education in the state. No compulsory attendance laws. No school taxes. No government school buildings. total free market educational system where entrepreneurs are doing everything to provide educational vehicles, and the customers, the families, are in charge of education. Government plays no role any more than it does in religion. All right. We've got to wrap up for time. Oh, we're out of time. Oh, man, just when I'm getting ready. I'm just getting a good start, guys. If you'd like to go to the few remaining questions, you can find them in the comments on Facebook. All right. Oh, thanks for your time. Oh, are you kidding me? Thank y'all for having me on there. Thank you for your time and your fantastic questions, and very appreciative. Come to my website at jacobforliberty.com. I got blogs there. I got videos. I got all sorts of stuff. And just thank you. Thank you very much for giving me your time and your attention and your consideration, and letting me have this opportunity to share my perspectives on liberty with you. And y'all stay well, and God bless all of you.